A man vanished before tea. No trace, no answers. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Umbra. I love seeing this community grow. Tell me where you're tuning in from today. Hearing from you makes this journey unforgettable. Let's begin. If you've never seen a man disappear in front of your eyes without moving an inch, you've missed one of the more interesting side shows New York has to offer. It happened to me one damp Wednesday in the office of Nero Wolfe's brownstone on West 35th Street, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't get under my skin. The office smelled like it always does when Wolfe has been fussing with his orchids upstairs too long, warm, earthy, and faintly sweet. Wolfe was sunk in his chair like an overfed Roman emperor, eyes shut, lips pursed in that half-sneer he reserves for civilization in general. I had the desk to myself, and the newspaper spread out when the doorbell buzzed. That buzz didn't usually mean good things. Clients call first. Unexpected callers tend to fall into three categories: reporters, salesmen, or trouble. This one turned out to be none of the above, or maybe all three at once. He was lean, sharp-suited, and had the kind of smile that looks like it was drawn in with a fountain pen, precise but not entirely trustworthy. He introduced himself as Adrian Kessler, and before I could ask for credentials, he slipped past me into the office like he had a deed to the place. "Mr. Wolfe," he said with a little bow, "I've come on an urgent matter, and I apologize for intruding without appointment. It was necessary." Wolfe cracked one eyelid, decided against wasting the energy, and left it closed. "Necessary for you, sir, not for me. State your errand and be brief. Archie, note the time." I glanced at the clock. 2:16, boss." Kessler's voice was polished, but underneath was something tight, like a violin string a quarter turn from snapping. "It concerns a disappearance, a man who is not missing in the police sense, but gone from his role, his obligations. My associate, Mr. Anthony Vale, failed to appear at a meeting of considerable consequence this morning. No message, no call. He has, in effect, vanished before tea." "Tea?" I repeated, because somebody had to. 4 o'clock, Kessler explained with faint irritation. The hour by which he was to deliver documents critical to a pending transaction. He has not been seen since last night. Now, Wolfe doesn't sit up for missing businessmen the way he does for a perfectly prepared saucis minuet. Still, I saw the flicker, a tiny compression of the lips, which in Wolfe speak means I might listen for another 30 seconds. "Mr. Kessler," Wolfe said, "the police accept reports of missing persons. If your concern is punctuality, consult a horologist." That should have ended it. But Kessler smiled again, thinner this time. "Mr. Vale's absence is not mere tardiness. There are those who would benefit greatly from his disappearance, and I have reason to believe they are close at hand." His gaze flicked, not too subtly, at me. I didn't take it personal. Guys like him like to check if the hired help blinks under pressure. I didn't blink. "You'll forgive me," Wolfe said, closing his eyes entirely now, "if I don't leap to the rescue of a man who failed to drink his afternoon infusion." Kessler stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Then perhaps this will sharpen your interest. If Vale is not found by tonight, a very large fortune will change hands, unjustly. And those hands may be far nearer this house than you realize." That got Wolfe to open both eyes, which, in Wolfe time, was the equivalent of a Broadway curtain rising. Adrian Kessler had the kind of composure that made you want to shake him just to see if it rattled. He didn't blink when Wolfe leveled both eyes at him, and that alone was a surprise. Most people crack when Wolfe goes from half-asleep Buddha to full volcano watch mode, even if the eruption is mostly smoke. "You suggest," Wolfe said, his voice unhurried but edged, "that Mr. Vale's absence is not merely accidental, that it is contrived. You imply, without stating, that forces near at hand may have ensured it. If you expect me to consider this, I require facts. Archie, beer." That was my cue. I slid out from behind the desk, went to the cabinet, and poured a glass of Remmers. Wolfe never entertained new business without lubrication. Kessler declined a glass when I offered. His nerves probably couldn't have handled hops at that point. Wolfe sipped, set the glass down, and aimed his gaze at Kessler like a cannon. Now, facts. Kessler shifted, and for the first time he looked less polished. Mr. Vale is not only my business partner, but also the trustee of certain documents, contracts, agreements, that govern the fate of a substantial property deal. If those papers are not delivered by this evening, the deal collapses. And with it, the financial stability of our company. I leaned back against the filing cabinet, arms folded. So your partner plays hooky and suddenly it's life or death. Sounds dramatic, but where's the crime? The crime, Kessler said with that precise smile again, is in who stands to profit. Vale's disappearance benefits one person above all, a rival investor named Corbett. Vale had the papers. Without them, Corbett's counter-offer wins by default. Millions are lost, unless Vale reappears. Or unless the documents reappear, Wolfe murmured. His eyes had half closed again, but that was just camouflage. The gears were grinding. Mr. Kessler, your phrasing is intriguing. You believe Mr. Vale did not abscond willingly, that someone engineered this? Yes. Kessler's voice sharpened. Vale is cautious, punctual, a creature of routine. He would not vanish voluntarily. I fear. He let the pause dangle just long, enough to season the air. I fear he has been persuaded to vanish. By Mr. Corbett? Wolfe asked. By someone in Corbett's employ, or another hand entirely, but aligned with his interest. I wasn't buying all of it, but I was buying enough to pay attention. Guys like Kessler don't stroll into a private detective's office with Shakespearean pauses unless they're either desperate or playing an angle. Sometimes both. Wolfe spread his fingers over the chair's wide arm like a king adjusting a scepter. You require me to locate Mr. Vale? Yes. Quickly. Fui. I do not hurry. Wolfe let that hang like a guillotine. Archie. Yeah, boss? Ascertain the veracity of this man, his address, his occupation, his company's existence. If he lies, I expel him at once. Kessler stiffened, but Wolfe wasn't looking at him anymore. His eyes had shut completely. When Wolfe closes the shutters, it means he's thinking or bored. I grabbed my hat because legwork was on the menu. Don't run away before I get back, I told Kessler. I wouldn't dream of it, he said smoothly. Outside, the afternoon drizzle had turned into a determined mist, the kind that seeps into your collar and makes you regret your career choices. I took a cab downtown to Kessler and Vale, attorneys at commercial law, which occupied a neat suite on Madison. The secretary at the front desk confirmed that yes, Mr. Kessler and Mr. Vale were partners. And yes, Mr. Vale had failed to arrive that morning. She looked worried enough to make me believe it wasn't staged. Mr. Vale called in last night before leaving the office, I asked. He left at 9, she said. He told me he had everything in order for today. That squared with Kessler's story. Too neat, maybe, but neat is better than ragged when you're testing fabric. I took the liberty of scanning Vale's office while she fetched coffee. It was orderly, tidy, and smelled faintly of cigar smoke. On his desk sat a blotter, a fountain pen, and an empty brass tray where papers had obviously been stacked. Too obviously. Someone had made sure nothing useful was left. The secretary returned with a cup I didn't want. Mr. Corbett's name mean anything to you? I asked casually. She blanched, which was a stronger reaction than I expected. Mr. Corbett is known to the firm. He's been trying to force a buyout for months. Mr. Vale despised him. Despised was a word you don't hear from secretaries, unless it's sincere. I left her looking pale and took a walk to clear the drizzle from my brain. Vale was real. Kessler was real. The missing documents were real. The only thing not real yet was the crime, but it was close enough I could smell it. By the time I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe had moved an inch in his chair. That's about the same as another man running a marathon. "Well?" he asked. "All true," I said, hanging up my coat. "Vale exists. Kessler exists, the papers exist, and Corbett's the kind of guy you'd like to drop into a vat of horseradish." The secretary practically fainted at his name. "Huh," Wolfe said softly. It was not a laugh. It was a pressure valve. "Then we proceed." Kessler leaned forward. "You'll take the case?" "I will consider it," Wolfe corrected. "Archie will investigate further. I will not yet commit myself." That was Wolfe's way of saying the hook had set. And if Wolfe was hooked, I was the one who'd be swimming. I shot Kessler a glance. "You'd better hope Vale really just misplaced his watch. Because if it's worse, you've just bought yourself front-row seats to a Wolfe inquisition. And believe me, you don't want the spotlight when Wolfe decides you're hiding something." Kessler smiled thinly, but his hand twitched against the arm of his chair. And I knew then he was hiding something. The thing about Nero Wolfe is, you can never tell when he's interested until he starts pretending he isn't. He'd finished his beer and folded his hands across his middle like the world had no further business with him, but I knew better. Kessler sat across from him, all cool angles and tense lines, waiting for a verdict that wasn't coming yet. Wolfe let silence do the heavy lifting, which it usually does better than any detective agency's budget. "Archie," Wolfe said at last, "you will call Mr. Saul Panzer, discreetly. I want a measure of this Corbett, his movements, his contacts, and any signs of unusual activity since last evening." That was Wolfe's polite way of saying, "Let's see if Corbett kidnapped our missing gentleman or just bought a one-way ticket to his troubles." Kessler exhaled as if Wolfe had handed him a signed contract. "Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. I knew—" "You know nothing," Wolfe cut him off. "I've undertaken nothing. I'm examining possibilities. No more. Be grateful for that much." If Kessler was offended, he didn't show it. He was too polished. But his eyes lingered on Wolfe's desk a moment too long, like he wanted to plant something there. That look didn't escape me. I got Saul on the phone, gave him the outline, and hung up knowing he'd know more about Corbett in 6 hours than Corbett knew about himself. That's Saul for you. While Kessler and Wolfe fenced in verbal slow motion, I took the liberty of watching our visitor's hands. They were steady enough, but his right thumb kept tapping the edge of his chair like it was spelling Morse code. He had nerves, no matter how glossy the exterior. Then came the buzz at the door again. I figured it was the mailman with something that could wait, but Fritz went to answer and came back with a face that could sour milk. Fritz doesn't like uninvited company, and he likes it even less when they shove past him. This time, it was a woman. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, and an expression that said she'd made a decision and everyone else had better get used to it. She strode into the office without so much as a nod to me, looked straight at Wolfe, and announced, "I'm looking for Adrian Kessler." That froze the air. Kessler stood, all charm and composure again, but there was a flicker of alarm that he couldn't quite paste over. "Miss Henshaw," he said, forcing a smile. "What a surprise." "It's Mrs. Henshaw," she corrected, not returning the smile. "And I'll have my answers now." Wolfe hadn't moved a muscle, but you could feel him take possession of the room. "Madame, you intrude. This is my office, not a stage for melodrama. Archie, a chair." I fetched one, mostly to keep the peace, though the idea of Wolfe letting 2 outsiders camp in his sanctum was something you don't see twice in a season. If Kessler had been half as perceptive as he thought he was, he'd have realized Wolfe was already cataloguing him for the butterfly board. Mrs. Henshaw sat, adjusted her gloves, and delivered her line. "Mr. Vale is missing, and Adrian here knows exactly why." Now that was a neat grenade to toss into a detective's office. I watched Wolfe, but he didn't twitch. He just closed his eyes again, as if silence could do the cross-examination for him. Kessler's voice was velvet, but the thread showed. "That is a grave accusation, Lydia. Mr. Wolfe, you mustn't take it seriously." Wolfe's eyelids lifted, slow as a curtain. "On the contrary, I take all disruptions of my routine seriously. Mrs. Henshaw, you will explain." Her gaze flicked at me, measuring, then locked on Wolfe. "Anthony Vale was with me last night. He told me he feared for his safety. He said Adrian was pressing him into signing over control of the firm, and now he's gone." Kessler barked a laugh, the kind you use when you want to drown out a gunshot. "Nonsense. Vale is loyal. He would never—" "He was loyal," she cut in, "until he realized your game, and now he's vanished. Don't pretend you're surprised." I looked at Wolfe, waiting for the explosion. Instead, Wolfe pressed his fingertips together and said, calm as Sunday soup, "Archie, note this. Mr. Vale was last seen by Mrs. Henshaw. He expressed apprehension. He implicated his partner. That will suffice." Kessler turned on me, as if I were the one making the record. "This is slander. Vale was unsettled, yes, but only because of Corbett's maneuverings. Lydia is repeating what she misunderstood." Mrs. Henshaw rose, her face pale but set. "I misunderstood nothing. You've made enemies, Adrian. If you think Nero Wolfe will shield you from the truth, you're wrong." She stormed out, leaving her perfume behind like a declaration. The silence that followed was dense enough to chew. Kessler looked like a man balancing on a wire. Wolfe looked like a man who just confirmed his suspicion that the wire was fraying. "Phooey," Wolfe muttered. "Archie, see her address. We will require her again." I scribbled it down from the directory card she'd left on the desk in her haste. Kessler attempted a comeback, but Wolfe lifted one finger and he froze. "Enough. You may remain, or you may depart. Either way, your candor will be extracted when I choose. Archie, send for Mr. Panzer when he calls. We are engaged." That last phrase sealed it. Wolfe had accepted the case, not because Kessler begged, but because Mrs. Henshaw had dropped a stone into the pond, and Wolfe liked nothing better than watching ripples reveal where the fish were hiding. I leaned back in my chair, gave Kessler a smile that wasn't a smile, and said, "Congratulations. You've officially disturbed the brownstone." Don't expect it to go back to quiet until Wolfe's had his say. Kessler swallowed, adjusted his cufflinks, and muttered, "I only want Vale found." "Sure," I said, "and I only want a raise. But what we want isn't always what Wolfe delivers. Stick around, pal, you'll see." And just then, the office telephone rang. Wolfe opened his eyes at the sound, his brows tightening. He hates interruptions almost as much as he hates dishonesty. I grabbed the receiver. It was Saul, his voice low and deliberate. "I've got something on Corbett," Saul said. "Something you'll want Wolfe to hear right away. And Archie, it's not pretty." Saul Panzer doesn't waste syllables. If he says something isn't pretty, it's because he stripped all the adjectives down to bone, and what's left is ugly on its own merit. I cupped the receiver against my ear and gave Wolfe the one-finger signal that means, "You'd better open both eyes. This matters." "Go ahead," I told Saul. "Corbett had dinner last night with 2 gentlemen," he said, his tone steady. "One is known muscle, Angelo Vera. The other is a fixer, Franklin Broad. They were at a private room in the Shoreham until nearly midnight. Vale's name came up twice, confirmed by my source. One mention included the words 'out of the way.' I didn't need to be a genius to connect the dots. So Corbett's plotting Vale's exit while ordering filet mignon. "Sounds that way," Saul said. "And Archie, it gets worse. At 11:30, Vale was seen leaving his office by a cab driver. Destination unknown. The description matches, but the cab never dropped him where he asked. Dispatch logged it. The cabbie went off route." "Kidnapped," I muttered. "Or persuaded," Saul corrected. Either way, Corbett's circle was circling. I relayed the essentials to Wolfe, who had tilted his head just enough to indicate attention. Wolfe's eyes narrowed to slits. "Vara and Broad," he murmured. "Mr. Corbett surrounds himself with vermin, as expected. Did your source discern their present whereabouts?" "Vara's at a club in Brooklyn. Broad's holed up at Corbett's Midtown suite," Saul replied. "Corbett himself hasn't been seen since noon." "Continue," Wolfe instructed. "Discreetly. I want the cab driver identified and available. Archie will coordinate." I hung up and faced the room. Kessler looked like a man who just heard the judge call for the noose. Wolfe, in contrast, had gone entirely still. That's when you know he's serious. The stillness deepens until it's like the walls themselves are waiting. "Mr. Kessler," Wolfe said finally, "your enemy Corbett appears more enterprising than you suggested. Mr. Vale may indeed have been suborned, or worse. Yet you omitted mention of Mrs. Henshaw." "Why?" Kessler licked his lips. I didn't think her involvement relevant." "Pfui," Wolfe barked. "A woman who declares Mr. Vale confided his fears cannot be dismissed as irrelevant. You will not trifle with me, sir. Archie, you will visit Mrs. Henshaw this evening. Extract her account in full." I nodded. I'd expected that. Wolfe never lets a voice go unheard if it rattles the cage. Kessler tried one more gambit. Leaning forward, his voice pitched low. "Mr. Wolfe, I engaged you to find Vale, not to rake over private scandals." Wolfe's eyes flared. Two sudden sparks. "You engaged me to examine truth. You do not dictate which truths I select. If that displeases you, withdraw." That shut him up. He looked away, smoothing his tie with fingers that weren't as steady as before. The rest of the afternoon passed with Wolfe retreating upstairs for his sacred session with the orchids. Kessler stayed planted in the office, feigning patience but radiating nerves. I handled phone calls, sharpened pencils, and watched him try not to sweat. By 7, I'd had enough. "Time to earn my keep," I said, reaching for my hat. "Fritz will see you fed if you're staying. Wolfe will be back when the orchids have forgiven him." Kessler muttered something polite, but I was already out the door. Mrs. Lydia Henshaw lived in an Upper East Side co-op, the kind where the doormen look at you like you're a smudge on the lobby marble unless you name-drop properly. I gave my name and purpose, got the narrowed eye treatment, and was finally waved through. She greeted me in a sitting room that smelled faintly of violets. She was sharper than she had seemed earlier, less fury, more calculation now that she was on her own turf. "You want the full story," she said without preamble. "I'll give it. Anthony Vale came to me last night because he didn't trust Adrian anymore. He said Adrian was maneuvering to take control of the company, using Corbett as leverage. He feared he'd be forced to sign documents he didn't want to. He was frightened. You don't know Anthony, but he isn't easily frightened." "And then?" I asked. "He left just before midnight. He said he'd stop by the office one last time to check the contracts. He promised to call me when he got home. He never did." That matched Saul's timeline like a glove. I asked her the obvious. "You're more than a casual acquaintance." She didn't flinch. "We were close. Close enough that he confided in me when he couldn't trust his partner." Her eyes hardened. "Adrian Kessler is clever, but Anthony suspected him of treachery. And Corbett, of course, is the vulture circling overhead. But I warn you, Mr. Goodwin, Adrian is not the man he pretends to be. You should watch him as closely as you watch Corbett." I left her place with more shadows than light. It was a tidy picture, but too tidy. Everyone was eager to hang a lantern on Kessler, which usually means the lantern's pointing the wrong way. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting in his chair, Kessler in the same spot he'd occupied all day. Wolfe took one look at me, saw the doubt on my face, and grunted. "Well?" he asked. I gave the report, word for word. Wolfe listened, his lids drooping lower with each sentence. At the end, he exhaled through his nose. Archie, Mr. Vale is a man of documents. Documents do not vanish of their own accord. Either they are destroyed or they are concealed. Tomorrow you will locate them. Tonight, Mr. Panzer's findings. As if on cue, the phone rang again. Saul, precise as clockwork. His voice was grim. Archie, tell Wolfe the cab driver's been found. He claims he delivered Vale not to his home, but to a townhouse on 73rd. Corbett's townhouse. That made Kessler choke on his own breath. Wolfe only leaned back, his lips curling into something halfway between satisfaction and disdain. Ah, Wolfe said softly. At last, the air begins to move. When Saul Panzer puts a pin on a map, you know it's not guesswork. Corbett's townhouse on 73rd wasn't the kind of address you stumble into by accident. Vale had been delivered there, Cabby confirmed, and that planted a big red flag right where Wolfe likes it, neatly centered in the field of suspicion. Wolfe didn't order me out immediately. He let the fact settle like dust in sunlight, waiting for it to show its pattern. Kessler was the first to break the silence. He leaned forward, his voice tight as a drawn bowstring. Then that proves it. Corbett has Vale. There can be no doubt now. No? Wolfe said, one eyebrow climbing. You leap, sir. I do not. We have indication, not proof. The cab driver placed Mr. Vale at Corbett's townhouse. That may suggest a meeting, voluntary or otherwise. It does not prove abduction, nor does it locate Mr. Vale presently. Your eagerness betrays you. Kessler flushed, but I couldn't tell if it was anger or fear. Maybe both. Wolfe flicked his eyes at me. Archie, you will visit Mr. Corbett. Do not confront him. Observe, inquire, and report. Do not return without something tangible. That was my signal to grab my hat again. Wolfe had a way of sending me into lions' dens with instructions to look like a tourist. Still, I've played that role often enough to know when to whistle and when to duck. Corbett's townhouse was a stately brick pile with iron railings and more polish on the brass than you'd see in a marching band. I rang the bell, got sized up by a butler who looked like he moonlighted as a border guard, and gave my card. He hesitated, disappeared, then returned with a curt nod. Mr. Corbett will see you in the library. The library was tall-shelved, wood-paneled, and smelled faintly of leather and cigars. Corbett himself sat in a wing-back chair like he owned not just the townhouse, but the block it stood on. Broad shoulders, a heavy jaw, and eyes that gleamed with the kind of confidence you usually find in men who can afford to make their problems vanish. Mr. Goodwin, he said, his voice a gravelly baritone. I've heard of you. Nero Wolfe's man. To what do I owe the honor? I was hoping you'd tell me, I said, parking myself on the edge of a chair without being asked. Seems one of your acquaintances, Anthony Vale, was dropped at your doorstep last night. But the funny thing is, he hasn't been seen since. That would make some folks curious. I'm one of them. Corbett's smile was slow, deliberate. Vale? Yes. He stopped by. Briefly, he left again after 10 minutes. 10 minutes, I repeated. Funny. The cab record says you got him around 11:30. His smile tightened but didn't crack. Then perhaps I misremember the hour. Regardless, he left. I've no idea where he went. Are you suggesting otherwise? I met his stare. I'm suggesting a man vanishes after getting out at your curb. You don't get to wave it off like a missed dinner reservation. You can understand how Wolfe might take an interest. Corbett's eyes flickered at Wolfe's name. Not fear, not quite, but irritation, like he'd found a fly in his soup. Wolfe should mind his garden. This is business, not a parlor game. Vale was unreliable, distracted. If he's run off, it's his own affair. That was a neat speech, but too neat. Corbett was drawing a line, making it sound like Vale had packed a bag and skipped town. Trouble was, I'd already heard the opposite from 2 directions. I pressed lightly. And Vera? Broad? They in the house last night?" That got me the smile without the warmth. "Mr. Goodwin, you are well informed." "Yes, my associates were here. They dined, they departed. I don't account for their movements afterward." "Convenient," I said. Corbett leaned forward, his bulk filling the space. "You will not find Vale here, nor will your wolf conjure him out of thin air. I suggest you tell him to stand down before he embarrasses himself meddling in affairs too large for his chair." That last bit was interesting. Not just a brush-off, but a warning, which meant Corbett felt the heat. And if he felt it, there was something worth burning for. I played casual. "I'll let Wolfe know you're concerned for his reputation. He'll appreciate the thought. One last thing. Vale left anything behind here? Papers? Briefcase?" Corbett's eyes chilled. "Nothing. Now good day." The butler reappeared like a ghost with orders and guided me out. I didn't resist. No sense pressing until I had more in hand. But as I stepped into the damp evening, I noticed a window curtain shift on the second floor. Somebody had been watching. The shadow behind it was too slender to be Vara or Broad. I filed that away and headed back. Wolfe was in his chair, of course, with Kessler pacing like a metronome gone wild. I gave the report, every syllable, including the curtain. Wolfe listened, eyes shut, until I finished. Then he opened them and growled, "Curtains do not shift of their own accord. Someone concealed is as eloquent as someone declared. Mr. Vale may yet be within that house." Kessler seized on that. "Then we must act. Call the police. Raid the place." "Silence," Wolfe thundered. "You would bungle matters irreparably. The police will not be summoned until I decree. Archie, Mr. Panzer will be deployed further. We will tighten the noose, but on my terms, not yours." Kessler stopped pacing, swallowing whatever protest was next. Wolfe leaned back, his voice lowering to a rumble. "This case reeks of duplicity. Vale feared Kessler, despised Corbett, confided in Mrs. Henshaw. Each points to the other. The truth lies in their contradictions. We will draw it out." That's when Fritz entered, holding a small silver tray with something I hadn't expected. An envelope, hand-delivered, addressed to Wolfe in sharp block letters. No return name. Wolfe took it, slit it open, and unfolded a single sheet. His lips tightened as he read. He passed it to me without a word. The message was typed, not handwritten. "If you value your peace, drop Vale. He's gone. Meddle further, and you'll regret it." Kessler gasped like a man in a melodrama. Wolfe merely said, "Phooey, an amateur's attempt at intimidation. Archie, preserve it. We will have the typewriter traced. Meanwhile, the game has at last begun." The note sat on Wolfe's desk like it had claws. Wolfe regarded it the way he'd regard a cockroach daring to cross his tablecloth, with disdain rather than alarm. But if you've been around him as long as I have, you learn to notice the micro-reactions. His fingers lingered a second longer on the paper before withdrawing, and that told me the intrusion had needled him where few things do. Inside his sanctum, with intent. Kessler was the one to break the silence, as usual. "This proves it. Corbett is desperate. He knows you're closing in. You must call the police at once." Wolfe didn't even look at him. "Do not presume to instruct me. That would be like a mayfly lecturing the sun. You're here as a petitioner, nothing more." That shut him up, but the air stayed thick. Fritz cleared his throat from the doorway, and I glanced over. Fritz doesn't interrupt unless it matters. "Mr. Wolfe, something is amiss in the kitchen. The drawer where the spice jars are kept has been disturbed." That was enough to snap Wolfe upright by an inch, which for him is practically acrobatics. "Disturbed?" "Yes." I returned to prepare the evening meal and found the paprika jar on the counter. I had not placed it there. Someone has interfered. You could almost hear Wolfe's blood pressure spike. Nobody meddles with his kitchen. Not clients, not guests, not even me unless I want to lose my head. The brownstone is a temple, and the kitchen is one of its shrines. For something to be moved there, with Kessler sitting not 30 feet away, meant a trespass. I was up in a second. "Fritz, anyone in the house besides us?" "No one. I checked the locks not half an hour ago. They remain secure." Wolfe's glare cut across the room like a blade. "Mr. Kessler, if you left this chair at any point without my knowledge, declare it now." Kessler raised his hands. "I swear, I never left the room." I checked the hall and the stairwell, quick but thorough. No broken locks, no open windows. Whoever had fiddled in the kitchen had done it quietly and deliberately, and left nothing but a paprika jar out of place. But that was plenty. When I got back, Wolfe's jaw was set like granite. "Archie, from this moment forward, the brownstone is violated ground. Someone has entered who had no right. They leave tokens, threats to test my composure." "Very well. We shall answer." Kessler shifted uneasily. "It's intimidation, nothing more. Corbett must have—" "Stop bleating his name," Wolfe snapped. "It may be Corbett, it may be another. Vale's disappearance has loosed a competition of interests. One wishes to rattle me. Archie, secure the kitchen. Then you will call Saul. He will watch the house tonight." That order landed like a gavel. Wolfe does not take kindly to trespass, and now the case had moved from professional irritation to personal violation. That meant trouble for whoever thought paprika was a clever calling card. I did the rounds, checked locks, windows, basement, attic, everything intact, no sign of forced entry, which meant one of two things: either the intruder had a key or they'd been inside all along. Neither was a happy prospect. By the time I got back to the office, Wolfe had composed himself, eyes closed, lips pursed as if he could will order back into the world by sheer willpower. The envelope and the note had been set aside in a folder, marked with Wolfe's tidy script. He believes in preserving evidence like relics, even when it's cheap intimidation. "Archie," he said without opening his eyes, "tomorrow you will return to Corbett. Not to him, but to his retinue. Angelo Vara first. He is a blunt instrument. Blunt instruments, when pressed, sometimes yield blunt truths. Tonight Saul will guard. If the brownstone is invaded again, I will not have it by stealth." Kessler muttered, "Perhaps I should leave. My presence endangers you." "Your presence," Wolfe cut him off, "offers me observation. Depart if you wish, but you will not scurry like a mouse. If you are endangered, it is because you conceal. Stay, and I will measure you." That was Wolfe's way of saying he'd already pegged Kessler as a variable worth keeping in the room. Whether Kessler liked it or not, he was part of the equation. The evening meal went forward, though with less serenity than usual. Fritz was stiff, Wolfe brooding, Kessler picking at his plate like a man expecting poison. Only I kept my appetite, because somebody had to keep the machinery greased. After dinner, Wolfe refused brandy. That's when I knew the intrusion had truly stung him. Instead, he dictated notes, precise and crisp, outlining every contradiction. Vale's trust in Henshaw, Kessler's eagerness to blame Corbett, Corbett's deflection, and now the intrusion into our fortress. Each piece was laid out like a chessboard, and Wolfe was already maneuvering knights and bishops while the rest of us tried to keep up. At 10 o'clock sharp, Saul arrived. He slipped into the office, received Wolfe's instructions with a nod, and vanished into the night again, a shadow on duty. Kessler excused himself shortly after. Retreating to the guest room Fritz had begrudgingly prepared. Wolfe grunted disapproval, but let him go. When the house finally quieted, I sat across from Wolfe, waiting. He opened his eyes and fixed me with that dark stare that makes you feel like your thoughts are under cross-examination. "Archie, someone has risked offense against me. That is folly, but it is also opportunity. They are clumsy enough to provoke me. We will use their clumsiness to draw them out." "Fine by me," I said. "But you realize, boss, if they can waltz in here once, they can do it again. And next time, it might be more than paprika. Precisely, Wolfe said. Therefore, we prepare. Tomorrow you will stir Vara, and perhaps Mrs. Henshaw again. I will sift the lies here. By the time they attempt another trespass, we shall be ready to tighten the net. And with that, he closed his eyes again, as if sealing the night inside them. I leaned back, listening to the hush of the brownstone, broken only by the faint sounds of Fritz locking up downstairs and the steady tread of Saul settling into his watch outside. The brownstone had been disturbed, no question, but the part they didn't know, the part Corbett or Kessler or whoever had staged this mess hadn't reckoned on, was that once you rile Nero Wolfe in his own house, you don't just get resistance, you get war, fought from a chair with words sharp enough to cut stone. The morning came on gray and heavy, the kind of New York weather that makes even the pigeons look like they've had enough. I had coffee in me and a plan in my pocket, courtesy of Wolfe. Angelo Vara was first on my dance card, and Vara wasn't the kind of man you drop in on without checking your shoelaces twice. He had a reputation, Corbett's muscle, quick temper, and a brain that worked just enough to know when to swing first. That was exactly why Wolfe wanted me to poke him. I found Vara at a pool room in Brooklyn, the kind of joint that smelled of stale cigars and varnish worn down to the bone. He was leaned over a table, cue in hand, built like a butcher, and dressed like he thought pinstripes made him invisible. I gave him a moment to miss his shot before I introduced myself. "Angelo," I said, leaning casually against the wall. "Archie Goodwin. I've been told you and I should have a chat." He straightened, narrowing his eyes. "What about?" His voice was low, gravelly, the kind that carries threat even when it's just ordering lunch. "About Anthony Vale. You know, the man who vanished after getting delivered to Corbett's townhouse. Word is you were around last night." That earned me a flicker, just a flicker. His hand tightened on the cue. "You're fishing in the wrong pond. I don't know anything about Vale." "Funny," I said, "because Saul Panzer's source spotted you and Broad sharing dinner with Corbett, and then a cabbie swears he dropped Vale at Corbett's door while you were still digesting. I'm no math whiz, but the numbers line up." Vara glared, weighing whether to deny or swing. I gave him a steady look, making it clear I wasn't rattled. Finally, he snorted. "If Vale came by, it wasn't my business. I didn't see him. Corbett talks to a lot of people. I keep out of it." "Sure," I said lightly. "Except Vale hasn't been seen since, and your boss is suddenly shy about the details. So either you're covering for him, or you're covering for yourself. Which is it?" He slammed the cue down hard enough to rattle the balls, and for a second I thought I'd gotten my wish for an early brawl. But instead he leaned close, his breath sharp with whiskey. "Listen, Goodwin, you tell Wolfe to keep his nose in his orchids. Vale was shaky. Maybe he ran, maybe he didn't. That's all I know. And if Wolfe keeps pushing, Corbett won't be the one who regrets it." It was an empty threat, or at least it wanted to be. But I caught the twitch in his eye when he said, "shaky." That was more than bluster. Vale hadn't run. Vara had seen something. I left him there, stewing, and made a note to myself. Wolfe would squeeze shaky until it bled meaning. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe mid-breakfast, methodically dismantling a pair of soft-boiled eggs. Kessler was already in the office, looking worn and impatient, like a man stuck in a waiting room without magazines. I gave Wolfe the report in full, including Vara's slip. Wolfe dabbed his lips and leaned back, eyes narrowing. "So, Mr. Vale was unsettled, perhaps coerced. Vara, being a blunt instrument, cannot help but blurt a fragment of truth. Shaky. Phooey. He may have seen Mr. Vale in distress. That places him at the scene despite his denial." Kessler jumped in. "Then that proves Corbett's guilt. Vale was there, distressed, and now he's gone. What else do you need?" Wolfe's glare could have peeled paint. "Mr. Kessler, your insistence on verdicts is tiresome. Proof is not a creature to be conjured by repetition. You will sit and you will wait." Kessler sat, but not happily. His hands twitched against his knees, betraying nerves that no Polish could hide. I settled into my chair. So what's next, boss? Keep leaning on Corbett's crew until they break? Not merely leaning, Wolfe said. We must expose the fracture. Mr. Vale's absence is intolerable to more than one party. Mrs. Henshaw fears him lost. Corbett feigns indifference. Vara denies too much, and you, Mr. Kessler, Wolfe's eyes locked on him, are frantic to assign guilt anywhere but your own doorstep. Therefore, the fulcrum lies in the documents Vale carried. Find them, Archie, and the lies will topple. Kessler paled. But those documents are gone with him. Pui, paper leaves traces. They were prepared, read, discussed. Someone has them, or destroyed them. Either act is as eloquent as speech. We will discover which. Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Fritz answered, then returned, stiff as a ramrod. A messenger, Mr. Wolfe. He insists on delivering this by hand. Another envelope. No return, just Wolfe's name. Wolfe slit it open, read, and handed it to me. The message was short. Vale is alive. He will stay that way if Wolfe withdraws. One more step and he disappears forever. Kessler's face drained of color. Wolfe, in contrast, only pressed his fingertips together. Ah, alive. They declare it, which means they fear we suspect the contrary. Good. The clumsy betray their intent. I looked at him. Boss, if Vale's really being held, this is more than a parlor game. We may be running against a clock. Indeed, Wolfe said, which is why haste, that vulgar corrupter, must be avoided. They wish to drive me into rashness. I will not oblige. Archie, you will return to Mrs. Henshaw. Press her harder. If Mr. Vale confided in her, he may have mentioned where the documents were stored. That knowledge is now more vital than his whereabouts. For the moment, Kessler sprang up. You mean you'll let him remain in danger? Wolfe's voice was cold as marble. I mean I will not blunder into a trap. You would prefer panic. I prefer reason. Sit down. And so the stage shifted again. I had my orders. See Henshaw, stir the truth, and bring back whatever Vale had trusted her with. Wolfe had already drawn his line. Vale's body might be hidden, but his documents were the lever, and Wolfe intended to pry until every liar in the room cracked open. By the time I reached Lydia Henshaw's door again, I'd rehearsed Wolfe's instructions enough to know he'd be listening to every syllable in my memory when I reported back. The woman opened the door herself, dressed in a slate-gray suit this time, no trace of the theatrical edge she'd worn in Wolfe's office. If she was shaken, she'd packed it neatly away. Mr. Goodwin, she said, voice crisp. Back so soon. Have you found Anthony? Not yet, I told her. But there's a chance he's alive, and that chance depends on clearing up a few loose ends. May I? She let me in, and I took the same seat in the violet-scented room. She stood by the mantel, one hand resting on it like it was propping her up. You said Vale feared Kessler, I began, that he confided in you. Did he mention where the documents were kept? Her eyes flicked down, just once, then back. No, he only said he had them secured. He intended to deliver them this morning, but he never returned home. That's neat, I said. Too neat. A man afraid of being forced into something doesn't just keep his papers lying around. He makes a plan. He tells someone he trusts. If that someone was you, I need more than generalities. Her lips tightened. You think I'm holding back? I think you're repeating what sounds safe, I said. But safe isn't going to cut it. Vale's disappearance has more hands in it than a poker game, and every player swears they've folded. So if you know where the real cards are, you'd better put them on the table. That earned me a flash of temper. Very well. He said he kept a copy of the agreements in a lockbox, not at his home, but at his club, the Westbrook Club on Madison. He was afraid Kessler would search his apartment. He thought the club was neutral ground. That was something tangible. Finally. But the way she dropped it, like a coin reluctantly pulled from a purse, told me she'd had it all along. "Why hold that back yesterday?" I asked. She drew herself up. "Because Anthony trusted me with it. I feared if I told Kessler, he would seize the papers and twist them to his purpose. I wanted you to find Anthony first." "Lady," I said, "with all respect, Vale might not have time for us to split hairs. Those documents could be the leash around his neck. Wolfe needs to know every scrap, and if you keep rationing me pieces, it's not just him you're crossing. It's Vale." For the first time, she looked unsettled. Her hand trembled on the mantel, just enough to show the strain. "I understand. Tell Mr. Wolfe everything, but for God's sake, find him." I promised nothing because Wolfe doesn't like me promising things I can't deliver. I left her with her violets and her secrets, hailed a cab, and headed straight back. When I walked into the office, Wolfe was where I'd left him, of course, surrounded by the smell of beer and leather-bound order. Kessler was pacing again, his nerves fraying like bad twine. I delivered the report word for word. At the mention of the Westbrook Club, Wolfe's brows lifted. At last, a locus. Clubs are repositories of vanity. Men hide their secrets there as they do their egos. Archie, confirm it, but be wary. If Mrs. Henshaw knew, others may suspect. You may find the box already rifled." Kessler sprang forward. "Then we must go at once. The papers must be secured before Corbett or his men get them." "Sit," Wolfe ordered. The word landed like a hammer. "Your eagerness, Mr. Kessler, is as incriminating as a confession. Why should you so fear their contents if they are harmless? You wish them hidden not from Corbett, but from me." Kessler flushed scarlet, stammered, then clamped his mouth shut. Wolfe turned away, dismissing him like an insect. "Archie, tonight, the Westbrook. You will fetch the lockbox if it exists. If it does not, we know the thief has beaten us. Either way, clarity will come." I nodded, already planning the angles. Clubs don't like outsiders rummaging through their vaults, but I had ways. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling I was walking into a place already swept clean. As I reached for my hat, the phone rang. Fritz answered, handed it to me with a look I didn't like. The voice on the line was low, distorted, almost a whisper. "Tell Wolfe the lockbox is empty. Tell him not to look for what doesn't exist." Then the line went dead. I stood there, receiver in hand, staring at Wolfe. He met my look without surprise, only cold satisfaction. As expected, they watch us, they anticipate, but their eagerness betrays them. Archie, go nonetheless. The act of looking may yield more than the object itself. That was Wolfe for you. Where others saw a dead end, he saw footprints in the dust, and if the game was being played this close, it meant the circle was tightening faster than any of them wanted to admit. The Westbrook Club was one of those monuments to male vanity that New York builds by the dozen. Mahogany paneling, brass fixtures polished within an inch of their lives, and enough oil portraits of dead financiers to make you think money could buy immortality. I signed in under my own name, which drew a squint from the clerk, but nothing more. Archie Goodwin doesn't exactly blend in with the kind of crowd that thinks cufflinks are a bloodline, but sometimes being out of place works to your advantage. They figure you're there on someone else's errand, which in this case happened to be true. I made straight for the members' vault, where lock boxes were kept under a clerk's care. Getting access was going to require tact, because waving Wolfe's name around would just get me an escort to the door. I leaned on charm instead. "I'm here for Anthony Vale's box," I said with my best casual smile. He asked me to pick it up while he's tied up. The clerk, a fussy little man with pince-nez, frowned. "Mr. Vale has not authorized such a withdrawal. Without his signature or presence, I cannot—" "Of course," I cut in smoothly. "I should have guessed. The thing is, Vale's a close client of my employer, Nero Wolfe. You may have heard of him. Wolfe doesn't take kindly to unnecessary complications. Why don't you just check the box? Confirm it's still in order. I'll wait here, and if Vale comes himself tomorrow, all's well. That was just enough bait. Curiosity beat protocol, as it usually does. The clerk bustled off, leaving me leaning against the marble counter. When he came back, his complexion had gone 2 shades paler. "The box," he said stiffly, "is empty. Quite empty." I kept my voice level. "When was it last opened?" He glanced at his ledger. "At 10 this morning. A man claiming to be acting under Mr. Vale's authority presented the key. I assumed it was legitimate. He had the key after all." "Description?" I asked. "Tall, broad, dark overcoat." I didn't get his name. That could have been half of Manhattan, but it was enough to suggest Vara or someone in his weight class. I thanked the clerk, feigned irritation like a dutiful errand boy, and walked out with more than I came in. If the box was empty, somebody had moved fast, and the phone call warning us not to bother had been a little too punctual, which meant one thing: someone inside our circle of informants was feeding them our steps. Back at the brownstone, I laid it all out for Wolfe, every detail down to the clerk's shaky hands. Wolfe listened, motionless, his eyes half closed. When I finished, he exhaled through his nose like a bull before charging. "As anticipated," he said, "the lockbox has been rifled. That is inevitable once its existence was known. The crucial question, Archie, is not who took the papers, but who knew to take them before you arrived. The telephone call was timed too neatly. Someone is privy to our exchanges." I didn't need to spell it out. Either Saul had sprung a leak, which was unthinkable, or someone closer, much closer, was piping information out. My eyes slid to Kessler, who had been loitering in the office, pretending interest in a magazine he hadn't turned a page of. Wolfe's gaze followed mine. "Mr. Kessler," he said, soft as a cat, "have you telephoned anyone from this house since your arrival?" Kessler bristled. "Of course not. You suspect me." "I suspect everyone," Wolfe replied, "until suspicion is exhausted. Your eagerness to direct my attention has already betrayed anxiety. If you correspond secretly with any party, declare it now. If not, your silence will be measured against the evidence." Kessler's hands clenched. "You think I'd betray Vale? He was my partner, my friend." Wolfe's voice cut him off like a knife. "Your friend whom you sought to control. Your partner whose absence benefits you as much as Corbett. Spare me the protestations of loyalty. Archie, ensure that Mr. Kessler remains available. He will not depart this house until I permit it." That landed heavy in the room. Kessler looked like a man cornered, but he said nothing more, and that silence was louder than anything he might have shouted. Fritz came in with brandy, set it down, and left without a word. Wolfe took his glass, but didn't drink. He stared into the amber liquid as though the solution to the puzzle might float up in the fumes. "Archie," he said at last, "the documents are no longer in play. They will surface when needed, in whatever altered form their possessor desires. What remains is Mr. Vale. Alive, they say. Alive, I believe, though constrained. His location is our objective. The lies surrounding him are closing in. Tonight we press Mrs. Henshaw once more. Tomorrow, Mr. Corbett himself shall be forced into my office, and then the edifice will collapse." The way he said it, low and final, I almost pitied whoever thought paprika jars and typed threats could shake Nero Wolfe off his chair. Almost. It was past 10 when Wolfe finally dismissed me with a flick of the hand, the kind that means, do exactly as I say and don't waste breath asking why. My destination was obvious. Lydia Henshaw. She'd already given us the Westbrook clue. Late, reluctantly, and only when pushed. Now that the box had turned up empty and a phone call had arrived right on schedule, Wolfe was convinced she knew more than she'd let slip. And if Wolfe was convinced, I had my marching orders, rain or shine. The cab ride up Madison was quiet except for the drizzle ticking against the windows. I let my thoughts run through the lineup like cards in a deck. Vale, missing but possibly alive. Kessler, twitching every time the word documents came up. Corbett, smug enough to sit in his library and dare Wolfe to blink. And Lydia, poised, precise, but too selective with her truths. Somewhere in that square dance was the hand that had pushed Vale off the floor. She opened the door herself again, still fully dressed, as if she hadn't planned on sleep. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me. "Another interrogation, Mr. Goodwin?" "Call it a friendly visit," I said. "Though you know as well as I do, Wolfe doesn't send me out in the rain for social calls. We checked the Westbrook box. Empty. And someone had the nerve to phone the house before I even got there to tell us not to bother. Now, unless you've developed telepathy, that means somebody close had inside information. Care to guess who?" She stiffened, arms crossed tight. "You're suggesting I called Corbett?" "Ridiculous." "I didn't say Corbett," I replied evenly. "But someone knew exactly what you told me. That's not ridiculous. That's arithmetic." "You've been careful with your words, Mrs. Henshaw." "Too careful. If Vale really trusted you, he told you more than just where the papers were. Where was he headed when he left you that night?" She faltered, only for a second. But I caught it. Her lips parted, closed again. "He said he might confront Kessler, that he couldn't go on with the deception." That was new. Too new to be casual. "Deception?" I pressed. Her hands twisted together. "Anthony discovered that Adrian was negotiating with Corbett behind his back, trying to use the documents as leverage. Anthony intended to expose him, to force a break. He was frightened, yes, but determined. He never came back." I leaned forward. "Why wait until now to share that little nugget? You've been holding it back like a gambler with an ace in his shoe." "I was afraid," she burst out. "Afraid that if I said too much, Adrian would twist it against me or against Anthony's memory. Don't you see? I want him found, not turned into a pawn in their war." Her voice cracked, and for the first time she sounded less like a polished adversary and more like a woman stretched to the edge. Maybe genuine, maybe performance, but either way it told me she was carrying more truth than she'd surrendered. I let it sit, then said, "I'll take this to Wolfe. But you should know, he doesn't forgive omissions. He files them under deceit." She swallowed hard, but didn't argue. I left her staring after me, pale and rigid, and rode back downtown with her words echoing. Deception. Negotiations. If Vale had proof Kessler was working both sides, then his disappearance wasn't just bad timing. It was silencing. Wolfe was waiting when I got back, of course. Yellow silk robe draped around him like a Roman senator who couldn't be bothered with politics. Kessler was still in the office, face gray and eyes darting, like a man who'd read the last page of a book and didn't like the ending. I gave Wolfe the fresh details without sparing a syllable. At deception, Wolfe's brows rose. At negotiating with Corbett, his lips tightened in satisfaction. He shifted in his chair, the closest thing to a trumpet fanfare. At last, the architecture begins to reveal itself. Mr. Vale threatened exposure. He vanished. "Mr. Kessler, you grow more luminous by the hour." Kessler shot up, fists clenched. "That's a lie. Corbett set this up to frame me. Vale misunderstood. I never—" "Sit," Wolfe commanded, the word striking like a whip. "Every protest you utter confirms the charge. If you were guiltless, you would not quiver like a nettled asp. Archie, tomorrow we summon them all. Corbett, Vara, Broad, Mrs. Henshaw. We shall arrange our little theatre here, where the walls will hold their lies until they collapse." I glanced at Kessler. Sweat shone on his forehead, and he looked about ready to bolt. But Fritz was outside the door, Saul was stationed within a block, and Wolfe had boxed him in with words sharper than any chains. He sank back into his chair, eyes darting like a cornered rat. Wolfe reached for his beer, sipped, and set it down with finality. "Archie, make the calls. Tomorrow evening, we will end this farce. Whoever holds Mr. Vale, alive or dead, will find themselves undone in this room." The way he said it, calm and measured, the brownstone suddenly felt less like a house and more like a trap with jaws already closing. And somewhere beyond the walls, Vale's fate ticked closer, waiting for Wolfe to spring it open with words alone. The next evening, the office felt less like an office and more like a stage. Wolfe had summoned them all, and they came. Some out of curiosity, others out of fear. Kessler sat stiff, colorless, glancing toward the door like he hoped it might dissolve. Lydia Henshaw was composed but pale, her eyes following Wolfe as though she knew the weight about to drop. Angelo Vera looked ready to punch the mahogany desk into kindling, while Franklin Broad tried to blend with the wallpaper. And then there was Corbett, smug, defiant, as if the walls themselves had been bought and paid for. Wolfe, of course, hadn't moved from his chair. He sat with hands steepled, eyes half-lidded, the picture of a man too bored to bother, until he opened his mouth. "Mr. Vale," he began, "was not abducted by chance. He was silenced because he discovered duplicity at the heart of his partnership. Mr. Kessler sought to use Mr. Corbett as leverage to consolidate control of their firm. Mr. Vale, unwilling, threatened exposure. That made him inconvenient." Kessler jolted upright. "That's a lie." "Sit," Wolfe thundered. "Your eagerness to brand every word false is itself a confession. The lockbox at the Westbrook Club contained copies of the agreements Vale would use against you. They are gone, spirited away by those who feared their exposure. And yet the clumsiness of the theft betrayed you. A warning call placed to my office came too promptly, too precisely timed. Only one man knew when Archie would arrive at the club. You, Mr. Kessler, you informed your confederates. Vale's disappearance, the rifled lockbox, the threats delivered to my house, all bear your signature." Kessler's face collapsed, blood draining. Corbett leaned forward, grinning like a jackal. "So, Wolfe, you admit Vale was taken. You've no proof it was me, nor my men." "On the contrary," Wolfe said calmly, "your men provided muscle, but not motive. Vara and Broad are tools, not architects. Mr. Kessler is the architect. He sought to feign victimhood, to enlist me against you, Mr. Corbett, while removing his partner and seizing control. Mr. Vale was delivered here," Wolfe's eyes flicked to Corbett. "But it was not your design. You were convenient camouflage. Kessler arranged it all, then sought to appear desperate for Vale's rescue. A trifle too desperate." Silence stretched, taut as wire. Lydia's voice broke it, sharp, incredulous. "Adrian, you used Anthony's fear, his trust, to destroy him." Kessler's lips moved, but no sound came. His hands clenched and unclenched, eyes darting like a cornered animal. Then, with a strangled breath, he whispered, "I only wanted the firm. I couldn't let him ruin everything." That was enough. The room shifted, the weight of his words sealing him tighter than any rope. Corbett's grin faded, replaced with wary respect. Even Vara lowered his gaze. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed, as if the business no longer required his presence. "Mr. Goodwin, telephone Inspector Kramer. Inform him that Mr. Adrian Kessler has conspired in the disappearance of his partner. Mr. Vale is alive. I will provide the address where he is held." Mr. Panzer traced the cab driver's route. Vale was concealed in a warehouse Corbett owns, but it was Kessler who arranged his confinement. The inspector will find him there. I picked up the phone, already hearing Kramer's bellow in my imagination. The room was still, broken only by Kessler's shallow breathing and the tick of Wolfe's clock. When it was done, Wolfe dismissed them all with a flick of his hand, as if clearing crumbs from a table. Lydia lingered, her eyes wet, but Wolfe spared her no glance. She left in silence. Later, when the brownstone was quiet again, Wolfe sat with his beer, the orchids upstairs tended, the world once more at bay. He spoke without looking at me. Men deceive for power, Archie. For wealth, for control, for vanity. Rarely for need. Mr. Vale endangered himself not by what he possessed, but by what he refused to yield. In such matters, appetite is ever the greater crime. I leaned back, watching him savor his beer. And here I thought paprika was the deadliest ingredient this week. He grunted, eyes closing as though the case itself had already been filed away. The brownstone was quiet again, and that was how Wolfe liked it. Case closed, dinner ahead, and the world outside kept firmly in its place. The next evening the office felt less like an office and more like a stage. Wolfe had summoned them all, and they came, some out of curiosity, others out of fear. Kessler sat stiff, colorless, glancing toward the door like he hoped it might dissolve. Lydia Henshaw was composed but pale, her eyes following Wolfe as though she knew the weight about to drop. Angelo Vera looked ready to punch the mahogany desk into kindling, while Franklin Broad tried to blend with the wallpaper. And then there was Corbett, smug, defiant, as if the walls themselves had been bought and paid for. Wolfe, of course, hadn't moved from his chair. He sat with hands steepled, eyes half-lidded, the picture of a man too bored to bother, until he opened his mouth. "Mr. Vale," he began, "was not abducted by chance. He was silenced because he discovered duplicity at the heart of his partnership. Mr. Kessler sought to use Mr. Corbett as leverage to consolidate control of their firm. Mr. Vale, unwilling, threatened exposure. That made him inconvenient." Kessler jolted upright. "That's a lie." "Sit," Wolfe thundered. "Your eagerness to brand every word false is itself a confession. The lockbox at the Westbrook Club contained copies of the agreements Vale would use against you. They are gone, spirited away by those who feared their exposure. And yet the clumsiness of the theft betrayed you. A warning call placed to my office came too promptly, too precisely timed. Only one man knew when Archie would arrive at the club. You, Mr. Kessler. You informed your confederates. Vale's disappearance, the rifled lockbox, the threats delivered to my house, all bear your signature." Kessler's face collapsed, blood draining. Corbett leaned forward, grinning like a jackal. "So, Wolfe, you admit Vale was taken. You've no proof it was me, nor my men." "On the contrary," Wolfe said calmly. "Your men provided muscle, but not motive. Vara and Broad are tools, not architects. Mr. Kessler is the architect. He sought to feign victimhood, to enlist me against you, Mr. Corbett, while removing his partner and seizing control. Mr. Vale was delivered here." Wolfe's eyes flicked to Corbett. "But it was not your design. You were convenient camouflage. Kessler arranged it all, then sought to appear desperate for Vale's rescue. A trifle too desperate." Silence stretched, taut as wire. Lydia's voice broke it, sharp, incredulous. "Adrian, you used Anthony's fear, his trust, to destroy him." Kessler's lips moved, but no sound came. His hands clenched and unclenched, eyes darting like a cornered animal. Then, with a strangled breath, he whispered, "I only wanted the firm. I couldn't let him ruin everything." That was enough. The room shifted, the weight of his words sealing him tighter than any rope. Corbett's grin faded, replaced with wary respect. Even Vara lowered his gaze. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed, as if the business no longer required his presence. "Mr. Goodwin, telephone Inspector Kramer. Inform him that Mr. Adrian Kessler has conspired in the disappearance of his partner. Mr. Vale is alive. I will provide the address where he is held." Mr. Panzer traced the cab driver's route. Vale was concealed in a warehouse Corbett owns, but it was Kessler who arranged his confinement. The inspector will find him there. I picked up the phone, already hearing Kramer's bellow in my imagination. The room was still, broken only by Kessler's shallow breathing and the tick of Wolfe's clock. When it was done, Wolfe dismissed them all with a flick of his hand, as if clearing crumbs from a table. Lydia lingered, her eyes wet, but Wolfe spared her no glance. She left in silence. Later, when the brownstone was quiet again, Wolfe sat with his beer, the orchids upstairs tended, the world once more at bay. He spoke without looking at me. Men deceive for power, Archie. For wealth, for control, for vanity. Rarely for need. Mr. Vale endangered himself not by what he possessed, but by what he refused to yield. In such matters, appetite is ever the greater crime. I leaned back, watching him savor his beer. And here I thought paprika was the deadliest ingredient this week. He grunted, eyes closing as though the case itself had already been filed away. The brownstone was quiet again, and that was how Wolfe liked it. Case closed, dinner ahead, and the world outside kept firmly in its place, 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 firmly in its place.